Hi, this is Bill, and this is Progpaganda. In our last episode on this channel, we talked a bit about the history of the English band Roxy Music. In that episode, we mentioned that there were three distinct eras of that band. One in its early days, 1971 through 73, which was notable from the participation of Brian Eno in the band. We're going to, in this episode, explore a little bit about that band's work and talk in detail about an album that version of the band created that I view as one of several masterpieces that the band created during its tenure. That album being their second one, For Your Pleasure. Roxy Music was signed by EG Records in 1971 and made their first album for EG, their self-titled debut, during that year, releasing it in early 1972. Roxy's first album was a fine debut record, but was not really an optimal release. It was made by a producer, King Crimson's lyricist, Pete Sinfield, who had not really worked on record production to any great degree before. He was co-credited as producer on King Crimson's early albums, but most of the actual work on those records probably fell to the performing members of the band. They also did the recording at what probably would be considered a suboptimal location, Command Studios in London. Command was a convenient location, but was really more selected by EG for its artists because of its convenience to downtown London and due to its low cost. Command was an ex-BBC TV television studio that had been converted to a recording studio, and in particular was less than optimal for sound recording due to its close proximity to the London Underground rail. Every now and then, recording sessions there would be disrupted by passing trains, which ultimately, after King Crimson recorded Larks, Tongues, and Aspic at Command, Robert Fripp insisted that EG find other quarters for the bands to record at. Upon leaving Command Studios, EG Records signed a new contract for recording facilities support with Associated Independent Recording, AIR, better known by its acronym, AIR Studios. AIR Studios was founded in 1970 by the Beatles' ex-producer George Martin and various partners that he had enlisted as independent producers to work with him when Martin left EMI and Abbey Road Studios in 1965. One of the producers that signed on to work with George Martin at AIR would be the producer of Roxy Music's second album, For Your Pleasure, Chris Thomas, who would work on and off with Roxy throughout the 1970s. Chris Thomas, although a relatively young man at this time, still only 23 years of age, was a fairly seasoned veteran as far as recording was concerned. He had worked on several of the Beatles' last sessions in 1968 and 1969 with George Martin, and by 1971 had branched out as a producer in his own right. One of his larger accomplishments as a progressive rock producer was in late 1971, recording Procol Harum's great live album with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. Roxy Music's For Your Pleasure is a terrific record. It's one that displays significant maturity from the band, both as musicians and from Brian Ferry, who continues on this album as Roxy's sole songwriter in his songcraft. The first song on For Your Pleasure is an in-your-face rock and roller that would be released as a single, Do the Strand. Do the Strand is a very danceable and radio-friendly number that features a fairly long solo session that is deliberately chaotic, with solos from both guitarist Phil Manzanera and hornman Andy Mackay going effectively in unison, being faded in and out as necessary. They move on then to Beauty Queen, which is a bit more stately in its composition. According to Brian Eno, Brian Ferry apparently wrote this song pretty much in a single sitting without any assistance from other members of the band, and it is one that features Ferry largely on vocals and electric piano with assistance from other band members as they move forward. It's a fine tune, to be sure. It's one that catches your attention, and like most of the songs in this album, doesn't really let go. I don't think there's a bad song on this album, although there's one song that we'll talk about that perhaps just goes on a little bit too long. The third song in the album, Strictly Confidential, is a very moody piece that features, again, solos from Manzanera on guitar and from Mackay on oboe. But here they're a bit more understated and treated by special effects, courtesy of Brian Eno. The featured instrument on the song is Ferry's voice, but the other instruments, again, fade in and out, but much more distinctly than they do on For the Strand. This is a piece that is very eerie and unforgettable as far as the mood that it creates. From there, they move on to Editions of You, a song that would be regularly featured in Roxy's shows going forward from this point on. It's a rave up of a number that again features interesting solos in the band, with in particular Brian Eno featured on this song on BCS3 synthesizer. Brian Eno was, by his own admission, never a great musician, but he definitely makes an impact with the sound of the synths on this song in a way that, again, definitely catches your attention. Perhaps the crown jewel of the album is the song that ends side one of its final configuration, the fifth song on the album, In Every Dream Home a Heartache. This is a fairly simple song in its construction. It's a two-chord composition in E flat minor. But what Ferry does with it, and in particular what the band does with it upon the conclusion of Ferry's vocals about halfway through, is nothing short of outstanding. It's probably among the most purely progressive rock songs in Roxy's catalog, despite its simple construction. The song's lyrics are meant to be haunting, going from a discussion of the dream home of the title and the decadence that potentially is happening there, and then changing gears to talk about one of the potential causes of the decadence, the sex doll that is Brian Ferry's plain wrapper baby. The mood of the song changes abruptly upon the completion of the main vocal, with Manzanera taking over with a blistering guitar solo, which fades out, but then fades back in, flanged and treated by Brian Eno, moving the song back and forth between the left and right channels, as well as adding the flanging and echo to the guitar solo, again, making it very hard to get out of your head. Side 2 is opened by another song that Roxy Music would make great use of in their live shows in the middle 1970s, The Bogus Man, where In Every Dream Home a Heartache is based on 2 chords. The Bogus Man is based on 1. Phil Manzanera is playing an ostinato throughout the 9 minutes length of the song in B flat. And to some ears, this probably does go on a little bit too long. In live performance, the song would generally be cut back to about 6 to 7 minutes in length. But it's a song that offered great opportunities for improvisation, and the band in live performance would indeed take use of that. The Bogus Man is followed by Grey Lagoons, which is perhaps the best straight-up rock and roll song on the album. Ferry's vocals are simple here, but the vocals of the song aren't really the point. The point of the song are the solos, again by Manzanera and Mackay, which in this case are just simply blistering. Finally, the album concludes with the title song, For Your Pleasure, an extended piece 7 minutes long that really comes in two parts. The main vocal, which is a somewhat brooding one and again somewhat moody in its presentation, but which then changes over about halfway through, melting into a sea of special effects and tape loops, with, in particular, among the tape loops, one featuring the voice of Dame Judi Dench, I suspect probably not realizing that her voice was used in this way at the time. It's an intriguing and very good record. Chris Thomas does an excellent job on the production throughout, although, to be fair, he may not have been the only producer. Early copies of the album note a credit to John Anthony, a special thanks credit, that is never really explained, although there are some sources that say that he had been enlisted as the producer early in the album's construction. John Anthony was a fairly skilled producer who had credentials working in the prog rock realm. In particular, by late 1972, when this album was recorded, John Anthony had worked with Genesis on their albums Trespass and Nursery Crime. So this was turf that he probably was fairly well familiar with. But that being said, with the recording of the album taking place at Air Studios, I don't think it would have seriously been considered that anybody other than a core member of George Martin's staff would have been credited as the album's producer. And Chris Thomas certainly was among the core people on Martin's staff at Air. And again, he was a phenomenal producer. He would, in addition to his work with Roxy, go on to work with many other bands, ranging not only within the realm of progressive rock, but also getting into hard rock later in the decade. In particular, Chris Thomas was one of the credited producers on the Sex Pistols' debut in 1977. Talk about versatility. Roxy Music would not last, unfortunately, very much longer in its current configuration beyond the release of For Your Pleasure. By September of 1973, Brian Eno had left the band. Some people say he was forced out for various reasons by Bryan Ferry. Others suggest that Eno had had enough and wanted to call his own shots as a solo artist, which of course he would, starting in late 1973 with his debut solo album, Here Come the Warm Jets. By 1973, Eno had also connected in a very large way with Robert Fripp, and they would make a series of albums together, with Fripp in particular using one piece that would be featured on their debut solo album, No Pussyfooting, the piece, The Heavenly Music Corporation, as walk-on music for King Crimson shows later in their history. So Eno obviously would very quickly make a name for himself in his own right. Eno's replacement in the band was not a lightweight by any stretch. Keyboard player Eddie Jobson, who replaced Brian Eno in late 1973, was a powerhouse instrumental performer on both the keyboards and on the violin. Despite his young age, he was only 18 when he joined Roxy. But Eddie Jobson would help Roxy achieve some of the band's musical highs over the course of the next several years. We'll cover that period of Roxy music from late 1973 into 1976 in our next episode. Join us for that one. In the meantime, if you liked this episode, please feel free to click like on the episode and to subscribe to the channel as well. We hope you do. That's all for now. We hope to see you again soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.